So how do you teach them these fundamental traits? Because uh, that's very qualitative in nature, right? So therefore, uh, dealing with ambiguity is what you talked about. Okay, chaos is something that the world is all about chaos, and therefore you need to navigate chaos, right? So these are some of the things that kids have to learn, but the schools don't teach them. Or for example, failure, okay, is something that kids have to be taught, because you go through failure in anything that you do, because you're not going to be you're not going to be first rank, or the best, the topper every time, right? So therefore, learning failure and coping with failure is a very, very interesting I would say pivot in terms of learning. So in the classroom, how do you teach it to the kids? Because if you really ask me, I saw an interesting post that you had put up saying that this whole endless cycle of assessments, okay, is really what is creating the problem, right? But then the endless cycle of assessments is really what the best IITs have come out of. The best IIMs have created the best, the management graduates. They're all in top jobs today, right? So therefore, the endless cycle of assessments has indeed created some successful people. So therefore, uh, how do you see it counter to what is needed in the, maybe the knowledge economy, or the the sharing economy, or whatever that we would call it? That's really the new craft economy that we are talking, which is coming in with the AI. So from the industrial age to the craft economy, if I were to call it, uh, how does this have to change? Because frankly, me as a parent, I'm actually saying that, hey, he's among the top 10 percentile of the class. He's doing very well. He's moving to a school. So clearly, if you were to apply this in your school, uh, I would want to know the progress of my kid, right? I would want to know, is he or she better than somebody else? Okay, and therefore, how successful would the next admission be as they move from one level to the other? So, how do you handle these things? And can you tell me, how do you really go through this process? Because what you're telling me, so you run a micro school. So first, tell my audience what's a micro school, right? And then, can you walk them through what is this whole process of teaching that you do there? Because it's very important for us to understand the model of teaching that happens there.
Absolutely. So we're a micro school, as the name suggests, that it's a very small school, and that's very important because, as we said, foundational to what we do is the idea that everyone learns differently. There's no standardized path, and therefore there's no standardized assessment. But the reason this is not really taken off so far is that it's very hard to put in practice. Right? Homeschoolers have done this for a long time. There are so many exceptionally gifted homeschoolers who've struggled in school, who've been homeschooled because the regular pace does not make sense for them. It's at both ends of the spectrum. Once you flatten it into a spectrum, right? Someone who's struggling because they're slower, someone who's struggling because they just get bored, right? And these people have gone on to do wonderful things. They've gone to Ivy League schools. I mean, they're Nobel Prize winners as well for being homeschooled. Uh, Now, conventional school, we were jumping ahead. So we're a micro school because we're saying that, okay, so if learning has to be personalized, we have to be able to pay attention to each one. And that is very hard to do if you have a class of 40, right? So if you have, let's assume that you have a class of 40 and you have one teacher come in for a 1 hour period, right? It means that you literally can spend about a minute and a half with each kid, which actually is ridiculous if you think about it, right? So how do you understand, what that kid is struggling with? So we have this system of standardized testing, of standardized teaching to make it easier at scale. So the system is not designed for the individual. The system is designed to work at scale and throw out some individuals. And as we discussed, the idea of true positives. True positives are, so to just explain what true positives and false positives are. So you have an exam, someone's going to rank in the top 10, right? Some of them are really good, some of them happen to be ones who just absolutely mastered the art of doing well in that exam. But often we look at the ones who are really good, the true positives, and assume that the system created them. But I would say that it's despite the system, right? They would have, like, they happen to thrive in that system, but that doesn't mean that they would thrive somewhere else too. But I think what's interesting is to see who struggled in that system and then has finally, said this is not for me and moved out. And there's so many such success stories. And I believe that if we open up our eyes and look around, there are so many such success stories. And this is more true now, and I think this is very important for people to remember. This, especially in an Indian context, we are not talking about the India of pre-1990s, where the GDP was growing at this very anemic rate, right? So we are, so I think for the next 20 years, our GDP growth rate is going to be one of the best in the world. And this is very important even for education, because it means that we are creating a ton of opportunities for everyone. And this means that there's not a single game. It's not a zero-sum game where it's not a government job, which is literally a zero-sum game, right? So some people will get it, the others don't get that. But in the real world, if we get our systems right, if we get our institutions right, it's a non-zero-sum game. So 1,000 people play the game, 1,000 people can win it. And that's a very profound and different perspective that we have to adopt at many levels. So you mentioned how I think that we have this anxiety, hey, is my kid better than someone else? How will they rank? This is what I would call the zero-sum thing, right? It made sense for a long time, but no, it doesn't make sense anymore. What we want to say is, what are the host of skills that they have, right? Sure, we can still compare them, right? There's always, if you use a mathematical translation here, right? So if you have two kids, you rank them on 100 dimensions, they're very different. You can still flatten that down to a single number, which is what we're doing. You can still rank them, but you've thrown the baby out, and how with the bathwater, right? So in the real world, maybe it's you flattened it out, but the things that really matter are 3 of those 100 dimensions, which this other kid who did really badly absolutely excelled at, and that's just being lost in this I think distillation, summarization process.
Okay.
So we really want to avoid that. But that, as I said, so assessment, rejecting conventional assessments does not mean that we say, hey, everything is great, let's just move through life without understanding where each kid is. No, we absolutely want to make learning visible. And that's where now AI is at such a great place, even now in its evolution, to help us, right? So we are able to synthesize observations about each kid, right? So, for instance, what we do in Comini, so we have, I think, 10 domains of knowledge. Within that, we have 25 different competencies across everything: fine motor skills, gross motor skills, socio-emotional well-being, critical thinking, all of these. So we are saying that we'll keep an eye on all of this, right? But we just won't reduce it to a single number. What we will have is rich observations, and then we'll be able to figure out how we can synthesize these rich observations to create a narrative.
Okay.
And why is that narrative important? Because we're saying that learning is a journey on this vast landscape, right? So we will have assessments. It's a very different kind of assessment. And what gives me hope is that I think, given where AI is, that we are able to now move to these richer assessments. Because earlier the big issue was, okay, if we have such holistic assessments for each kid, which are also subjective, how do you even go through 1 million of these, right? It was not possible, but now it is. The world that's been opened up by AI, it is. So that is a very exciting possibility. But for us, yes. So so we're a micro school because we think learning should be personalized. We believe the old assessments are wrong because they're too narrow, too rigid. But that doesn't mean that we reject assessments. It's that we need holistic assessments, and that's what we are doing.